Good morning, everybody. There we go. Right. Right. This is my daughter, Agatha. And over a decade ago, she asked me a question that changed the course of my working life. And she asked, can we ride to the park? And it wasn't really her question that changed everything, it was my answer, which was no. Now, we lived in a fairly typical seaside town in the northwest of England called West Kirby. And the distance from the park, I know because I'm quite geeky like that, and I measured it, is 584 metres away. And now that journey takes just under 3 minutes to do, I know because I actually timed that as well. And I, an ex-Olympic champion, whatever, all of that stuff, didn't feel I could keep my daughter safe on our roads for less than 3 minutes. And that made me feel bad. That's not where she wanted to live. It's not where I wanted to live. So I decided to do something about it. And 15 years later, I'm still at it. What am I telling you about that for? Well, I think for two reasons. The barriers that we face to getting more people to use our green space are often a long way from the paths and the parks and the pitches, the playing fields. And no matter how wonderful our bits are, the bits that a lot of you are providing, the barriers are where they are, and if we don't tackle them, we can't fulfill our potential. So that's the main reason. The second is the best things that I ever learned were a long way from my comfort zone for what I normally did, for overcoming those barriers. And some of them were literal, some of them are emotional, some of them have been political in recent times. But in all of those things, I found in the lessons that I learned along the way, some observations that I thought might be useful for you. And then I found some things that were universal, no matter where it was, what I was working with, be it chasing gold medals, working in wind tunnels, or delivering infrastructure. So I thought for the next few minutes I might step away from the obvious and share a little of my journey with you, in the hope that you might find some use in some of the things that I stumbled across and that could be useful in your context. So I said that the next few minutes I might step away from the obvious. There's a picture for the ages. A lot of my journey, well, this is where it took me, and seeking to plot that path to the park for my daughter. This is where I ended up, and it turned out that advocating for active travel really wasn't hard. I could speak to pretty much any topic that was in the news of the day, and to this day active travel has an ever-growing and enduring relevance. Now I check YouGov polls quite regularly to see what are the priorities, what do we need to speak to, and you won't be surprised to hear that the people's priorities really are cost of living, NHS and climate change. And let's get rid of that picture. So cost of living, well, I ran an experiment 5 years ago to try living without a car, and the experiment's still running. And my bike cost me £25 a year to run. Cheapest form of mechanised transport that there actually is, which is pretty important when you consider that a third of the population, just under a third of the population, more in densely populated areas, don't have access to a car at all. Best way to secure the future of the NHS, well, is to use it less. That's how you make it sustainable. Inactivity right now, as was alluded to by Pippa, I think, a moment ago, well, that's killing 1 in 6 people now. 1 in 6 people, their deaths are directly related to inactivity. That's the same as smoking, and it's costing us £7.5 billion a year to deal with. But imagine if we had Dutch levels of kids being able to get to school independently. And then the last one, decarbonisation, one of the lowest carbon form of transport there is us. So there's a veritable data mountain proclaiming that more self-propelled journeys would benefit all of us. So why haven't we done it? what's the barriers? It's clearly not a lack of data. And realisation number one for me was we are not evidence-driven. It's not the most important thing, which sounds crazy, but look at climate change. You know, we know there's an existential crisis. We know it's species threatening, and we're still trying to negotiate with it. And that's because we're built to do the easiest thing for us right now, and we fear change. And we particularly fear change if we think it's being imposed upon us. We're hardwired to do the easiest thing for us right now. The evidence is just everywhere we look if we choose to see it. And when I say easy, I mean really easy. To say 0.2 of a second. And we ignore those drivers at our peril. And if we do ignore them, then we're probably going to fail. We keep talking to the evidence. The evidence is like the foundation. You can't build anything lasting without it. But nobody buys a house because it's got great foundations. Which is why I told you about my daughter, because she is the key. Few things connect with our emotions more than kids. And for them, we'll consider doing the less easy thing. We'll go a bit out of our way. And a child asking the right person, why can't I ride to the park, is going to have a much more powerful impact than pretty much any bar chart. So what about fear of change? What about enables people to step into the unknown? Well, I learned about how to help people get comfortable with different in a dark wind tunnel in Southampton. And it was an approach that proved just as effective decades later working with local councillors. So how do I get into that? Well, I worked with British Cycling for many years before we started winning stuff, and I was head of research and development, and unsurprisingly we ended up in wind tunnels because 90% of the energy when you're riding a bike quickly is just pushing air out of the way. So it was a natural place, a tool that would show us better, worse for all of the things that we're doing. And the results from this were quite remarkable. But if the information was so valuable, we thought we'd keep it really tight. I'll work with just a couple of athletes to help with the experiments. We'll keep the information tight. I'll take it to the British team when we get towards the end of our development cycle, and I'll give them the stuff that make them go faster, and everybody wins. And that's pretty much what we did in our first, so we ran this several times, so 2004, 2008, coming up to the Olympic Games in 2008. And bear in mind, we didn't win anything in those days, and we hadn't even qualified for the Olympics yet. So I turned up at a qualifying event for the Olympics. Everybody's quite stressed because this is the reason for being: blood, sweat and tears. And I said, right, here's some clothing, here's some helmets, here's some positional advice, here's the data for it, it'll make you go faster. And my job was done. So I was satisfied. I went and sat in the stands, and I watched 80% of the athletes carry on doing exactly what they were doing before. And I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that I'd given them this recipe for success, and they carried on doing everything they were doing before. And in my arrogance and ignorance, I completely missed the fact that they had spent blood, sweat and tears getting to where they were to do what they were doing. And then some kid comes along at the last minute and says, don't do it that way, change and do it this way, when they were under stress. 20% of the athletes did everything that we wanted them to do. And they were the ones that had helped us with the experiments. So the penny finally drops, and we rush back to Southampton. We cut a hole in the ceiling of the wind tunnel, just about here, so we could project live data on the floor in front of the athletes. And they chose how they wanted that presented. It could be watts or newtons of force or time saved in their event, whatever they wanted. And we got the whole Olympic team down, put them in one by one, and just let them play. So we just let them look and try things out and see what happened to their event time, what would happen to their performance. And then they started to ask questions, and the experts were then started to answer those questions. And then they asked, for some suggestions, and then they were handed pieces of clothing and helmets. And over the course of probably about an hour, hour and a half for each athlete, they all moved pretty much to adopt what we thought was the best for them, because the evidence was in front of them. But the point was, it was their choice. The choice belonged to them, and that included to stay the same. And they could see the consequences, including of staying the same, for all of those choices. So that tool became as much a psychological one as it was a scientific one. Their choices improved their performance by an average of 7%, and it took many of them from fourths and fifths to gold. At the moment, we made a massive breakthrough, and they became the most successful Olympic team of all time. They were winning more medals than pretty much all countries were winning outside of the top 10 in the medal tables. But without that moment of feeling in control and having a way to explore different before they made their decision, I genuinely don't think we would have ended up the same way. So I've talked about some personal drivers and some ways to help people try different in a very specific environment, but does it scale up? Can you apply that approach really in a wholly different context? Well, alongside my Olympic work, British Cycling also gave me a platform to advocate for more people, for anybody who wants to walk, wheel or ride more, to make some safe space for them to do that. And it was starting to really have an impact, and it was cutting through, and politicians were noticing, so much so that in 2017, Andy Burnham, who'd just become the new Metro Mayor for Greater Manchester, decided to put his money where my mouth was and give me the opportunity to move into delivery, to try and make all of this real. So I became the Greater Manchester's first cycling and walking commissioner. And as we did with the athletes, the first thing that I did is we want to see where are we now, baseline, warts and all, what does it actually look like? And it was pretty startling, and it also needed to be in the language of the people that I was speaking to, in this case the leaders of Greater Manchester, and the things that they were going to be held accountable for. And it was a pretty startling picture. 1/3 of all car journeys in the region were less than 1 kilometre. 250 million car journeys a year of less than half a mile. With a combined cost to the region of £3.75 billion every year. Inactivity alone still is costing the region $500,000 a week to deal with. And 600, that's actually risen now as well, 600 people are being killed or seriously injured on the region's road on an annual basis. Now, despite accepting that the status quo was absolutely horrible and that without substantial change, there's no way that anybody was going to hit decarbonisation targets, it still wasn't a done deal. That's how much we actually fear change. So what we needed was a wind tunnel for councillors, a way for them to be able to let go of their current reality so they could explore without being overwhelmed by a fear of change. Sadly, it wasn't as glamorous for the councillors of Greater Manchester. It consisted of a blank map and a set of pens. And we, I was lucky, I got together this lovely, really fantastic, inspiring small group of people. One in particular, a guy called Brian Deegan, who's now Director of Inspections for Active Travelling. We said, let's get all of the 10 districts, each of them have a meeting. Just bring a blank map of your area. You choose in the room. Choose if you even want to have a meeting to look at what we might do about those figures. And everybody agreed and they assembled. And we went into the room and there's people, arms crossed, sort of sensing what's this about. And said, right, would you ride a bike outside your house? And they're looking around the room thinking this is a trick question. Yes. Okay, would you ride it to the shops? No. Why not? Well, I get to the end of my road and there's a canal, train track, generally a busy road. Okay, what's on the other side? That's a road like this one. Would you use that? Yes. Okay, so that's the problem. How can we get across that? So it was usually controlled crossing of some kind, and there was a bridge or something they needed to get across that. So, okay, put that on the map. And they drew it on the map. And then we said, okay, where's the schools? Where are the shops? Where do people work? What would be your preferred route if you were going there? And we started to populate this map. Slowly they leaned in. and drew it in. And after about an hour and a half, and I was talking about this singularly, even though we did it 10 times, because it was pretty much exactly the same experience, you could see them lean back and go, bloody hell, this is possible. This is actually doable. And they created a network for their region, for their area of Greater Manchester. So we said, okay, can we, rather than pay consultants a couple of $100,000 in 2 years to create a beautiful map and then bring it back and we'll sell it to everybody, can we just put it online as a draft and let anybody comment whatever they want, which is obviously quite high risk, whatever they want about this. Can we put it all together? It turned out to be 1,000 miles when we looked at it. And to their credit and their courage, they agreed, they let us do it, we put it online. And within pretty much a matter of hours, we had 4,000 comments. And the biggest complaint that we got was where's ours? I've been talking and not looking. The biggest complaint we got was where's ours? And as a result of that online consultation, it expanded from a 1,000-mile map, these are all the points where crossings and things they thought were needed, to 1,800 miles. So within less than 6 months, we had clarity of purpose, a sense of ownership and a feeling of pride, the biggest map in the country. You know, Manchester, Greater Manchester, doing things differently. And we call it the B network as well, because the B, the symbol of the region, very emotive. So to make sure it belonged to them. And the beauty of it was, we never touched a peg. They did all of it themselves. So to deliver an effective network, we needed to do some really hard stuff. In a sense, that was the easy bit. Safety standards at junctions and things that would basically disrupt life for a period of time. And it was going to be quite annoying for that period of time. So we've all seen the headlines at the moment. A lot of stuff in the Daily Mail saying, oh, no traffic neighbourhoods, everyone's going to die. And the YouGov polls that I mentioned at the start, nobody's top priority was more cycling, walking and wheeling. But those things would get people the stuff that a lot of people do value. So we talked exclusively to that, even when we were talking about something as dull as standards. Let's see if this works.
Hi, I'm Amy, I'm a mum of 2, I'm a mum of Ruby and Phoebe, and we're off for a walk on this lovely sunny day. Walking about with a double pram can be quite difficult. The pavements are often far too thin and cars often park quite far on the pavement, so it makes it really difficult to get past. And busy roads where there's no crossings is also quite a struggle, and you're lucky if someone stops for you. I'd absolutely love to be able to walk on a school run, but with the busy traffic and the lack of crossings, it's probably not possible. It'd be absolutely brilliant if there were more zebra crossings, not only in the area but in Manchester in general, because it makes it really difficult if there's not those things, just to go out and about, and sometimes it's just easier to get in the car.
So how did that make you feel? Did you get angry when people wouldn't let across the road with the kids? And I think that's the beauty of we portrayed it about things that people care about, kids and families being able to do stuff. And we sought to harness those instincts, and we showed pictures of the outcomes that people wanted, not graphics, which graphics are great for giving information, but they don't make you feel angry or sad or happy or inspired. We wanted pictures of people who look like me, people who look like us, doing things that I value and I care about. So those standards, which I mentioned for walking, the standard in Greater Manchester was the double buggy test, must be usable and want to be used by a parent with a double buggy. For somebody on a bike, LTM, the 12-year-old test which must be usable and want to be used by a 12-year-old, and to give their parents the confidence to use it. And they're really hard standards, but framed that way, you understand what the point is straight away. Nationally, we have to work to LTN 120. It doesn't quite have the same emotional impact and connection with everyday people, does it? And by connecting the normal people, as it were, to that work, we had a much larger cohort of the community relating to it, invested in it, fighting for it, for their rights to walk and their kids' rights. And crucially, by extension, by doing that, we were also working for disability access and infrastructure, because what a parent with a double bugger needs, so does somebody who's in an adaptive cycle or in a wheelchair. But we'd expanded the amount of people that wanted those things. It was a massive learning experience for me, and I was deeply grateful to be given that opportunity by Andy Burnham. And I spent a few years helping move that vision to a strategy and then into delivery, and then my brief expanded into transport, and then it started to be about connecting trams, buses, trains, all of these things together, hire bikes, and moving towards a place where you could tap on any one of them, which will be the case in a few years' time, and the fares will be capped for each day, so you can mix and match depending on the weather or what it is that you want to do. It's absolutely wonderful. But then in 2020, gear change was announced. A quite beautiful policy with a very, very clear outcome. 50% of all of our journeys cycled or walked by 2030. Unambiguous. Cash to do it, at least there was. Cash to do it, and an agency to deliver all of that change. And I was given the opportunity, alongside my work as chair of Sport England, to set up this new agency, Active Travel England, to scale up that work that we did in Greater Manchester for a country. That's not an offer you can refuse, really, is it? So we've just finished doing that now. And it's a pretty exciting time. It's the first department or agency of the Department for Transport that can actively help local authorities win money, help them with designs, but make sure their designs are up to spec. And we're applying the same approach that we did in Greater Manchester, and the same that I did years ago trying to win gold medals. It's a choice, and local authorities choose whether they want to do it to these standards, but we won't fund anything that isn't, because it doesn't work. We won't fund stuff because it's easier to put it in over there. And we measure leadership and commitment. It's actually a function of funding, is showing leadership, and that's not just saying it. It's like, how many people have you employed to do this? Have you got a network plan? What have you delivered before? And it's working already, even at a fledgling stage, it's working. And it's so important because Active Travel England meshes beautifully with other agencies, like the Sport England. I'm going to talk more about that in a moment, how those things overlap. But it directly benefits 8 different government departments, 8 out of 24. The Chief Medical Officer, Chris Whitty, is one of our advisors, and has said that Active Travel England is the single biggest health intervention that this government is actually making. So that was pretty exciting. And as we found with Amy, by connecting more agendas, more people together, barriers are more easily overcome. So I began looking for collaboration opportunities, how the same activity, how could that activity be framed authentically to tackle more than one issue. And I found myself down in Jaywick with my Sport England hat on, where there was, and it was actually already happening, where Sport England had backed Active Travel Essex to give away 5,000 bikes in a really deprived area of the country to people who needed it for health. And that's something that the local council needed to do. They needed to improve population health. And at the same time, Active Travel England and the council put in the safe space that connected all of those communities along the free front with Clacton next door to connect them with work. So many different things coming together. And that's, I mean, maybe we'll get into it a little later on with questions, but Uniting the Movement, Sport England strategy, we've recognised that 1/3 of people will switch off as soon as you say the word sport, because that's something other people do. But we need to get a nation active. And to do that, we have to say, what do you want to do? What are the things that you can, would like to do? Where you are, And this was all part of that work, and it was already having a fantastic effect. I think about 60% it is of the people who are involved in the project. 60% of their health has markedly improved. There's now a practical tool for GPs to socially prescribe. You could do with looking after your health. Here's a ticket for a bike, go and use it. Here's the safe space to do it. Just beautifully connected. And the bike track itself, the use of it is rising rapidly, which gives everybody confidence to do more. It's not plain sailing, it wasn't easy. There was fear of change, 2 parking spots. A councillor campaigning for just 2 parking spots nearly stopped it all. But because so many people had got involved for so many different reasons, then there was enough impetus to overcome that. Some of the barriers that face us are a lot closer to your work, as has just been touched upon, and they're literal. You know, I personally experience about 5 of these every weekend, and they're a minor annoyance to me, a significant annoyance to anybody who's on a mountain bike or something with wider handlebars, and a total showstopper for anyone with a double buggy, a wheelchair or an adapted cycle. Now, despite them being contrary to the Equalities Act 2010, not only are some councils reluctant to take them out for that fear of change, for fear of what might happen, some are still actively putting them in against guidance. And they're usually bypassed by the people they're aimed at, the kids with scrambler bikes, who are able to manhandle a motorbike around the obstacle, but it actually blocks very effectively those that can't do that, those that need the space most, and they're denied access. In fact, Sustrans have just recently surveyed all of their network, 5,100 miles of it, and they've recorded 21,700 barriers and restrictions like this. That's an average of 4 per mile. Now, these are known to be the main reason why wheelchair users and those using mobility scooters and adaptive cycles don't use the very best bits of this absolutely wonderful network. What we do know is where they've been replaced or removed, and been replaced with well-spaced bollards, local residents often, mostly, they prefer it. There was a recent study in London, I can't remember exactly where it was, somebody might be able to remind me, showed that usage went up by about 34% because it was more easily accessible when you've got kids and prams. Usage went up 37%. 67% of residents thought it had a positive impact on their area. And rather than enabling antisocial behaviour, about a third of people, a third of residents thought it actually gone down. So clearly, evidence is not enough. So what do councillors and council officers need to feel able to try something that's different? Who is the wider group of people who would benefit from a truly accessible network? And what's the simple statement or vision that would emotionally bring them all together? So you all have very different definitions of success. There's obviously some overlap. And I don't know what your barriers are or who your allies could be if we look more broadly, and what your big purpose could be. But I do believe, and what I've been hopefully illustrating, is that if we seek change, we need to speak to instinct a lot more than intellect. And I hope that gives you just maybe a couple of things to ponder as you do the just brilliant work that I already enjoy. It's the reason I do the jobs that I do. And some ideas and different approaches to removing some of your barriers. What I want to do is create a national network that will give every child in this country transport independence and access to the green spaces that are parks that many of you are providing. But mostly I'm doing it for selfish reasons. Last month my daughter was 18, and I intend to make sure that when she has kids and they ask her the question, she's able to say, yes, we can ride to the park. Thank you.